In this episode, we focus on intellectual property and why it matters to security management in a way that goes beyond the idea of people stealing secrets. Intellectual property is about the legal protections that apply to creations of the mind, such as inventions, software, written content, designs, and distinctive brands. And those protections influence what an organization must protect, how it must protect it, and how it must respect the rights of others. Beginners sometimes assume intellectual property is only a legal topic handled by lawyers. But in practice, intellectual property becomes a security concern because it shapes what information is valuable, what information is restricted, and what evidence an organization needs when rights are disputed. Intellectual property obligations also appear in contracts, employment agreements, licensing terms, and partner relationships, which means that the security program must support compliance in daily operations. The goal of this lesson is to understand the main intellectual property categories at a high level, identify where obligations come from, and then translate those obligations into practical security controls that reduce risk and support the organization's legitimate rights. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful starting point is understanding why intellectual property is different from general confidential information. Confidential information is data the organization wants to keep private, such as internal plans or non-public financials. Intellectual property is information or creative output that has specific legal protections, and those protections carry legal rights and legal responsibilities. For example, an organization may have the right to exclude others from using an invention if it is protected in the right way, or it may have the right to enforce certain restrictions on a creative work. At the same time, the organization has responsibilities not to violate others' intellectual property rights, such as using software only according to license terms or not copying protected content improperly. Security controls support both sides, protecting the organization's own intellectual property and preventing the organization from accidentally committing infringement. For beginners, it helps to see intellectual property as a set of rules about ownership and permitted use, and security as the discipline that helps enforce those rules in real systems and workflows. The main categories of intellectual property include patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. And while we do not need legal depth here, we do need to understand what each category implies for security. Patents generally relate to inventions and technical methods, and the security relevance is often in protecting invention disclosures and documentation so that competitive advantage and legal rights are not undermined by premature release. Copyright generally protects original creative works, including software code, documentation, and media content, and security relevance includes controlling copying and distribution, tracking authorized use, and ensuring that the organization can prove authorship and licensing compliance. Trademarks protect brand identifiers like names and logos, and security relevance includes preventing unauthorized use, detecting impersonation, and protecting brand integrity in digital channels. Trade secrets are valuable information kept secret to maintain advantage, such as formulas, algorithms, internal methods, and customer lists, and security relevance includes strong access control, monitoring, and careful handling processes. The beginner takeaway is that intellectual property is not one thing, and each category leads to different protection needs and different risks. Trade secrets are often the most directly connected to security controls because their legal protection depends on keeping them secret. If a trade secret becomes public, the organization may lose the ability to claim it as a trade secret, which means the damage can be permanent. Translating this into controls means identifying what information is treated as a trade secret, limiting access to those who need it, and using protections that reduce the chance of accidental exposure. This includes managing storage locations, controlling who can copy or export data, and monitoring for unusual access or large transfers. It also includes policies and training so staff understand that certain data is handled differently, and it includes agreements with partners and contractors that define confidentiality expectations. For beginners, a useful idea is that trade secret protection is not only about stopping hackers, it is also about preventing accidental disclosure through normal work habits. A strong control environment supports careful handling without making work impossible, because if controls are too restrictive, people create workarounds that increase risk. Copyright and software licensing introduce another intellectual property challenge that security leaders must understand. The organization can violate intellectual property rights without intending to. For example, using software beyond its license terms, sharing licensed tools improperly, or copying code without understanding its licensing obligations can create legal and operational risk. Translating this into security controls involves governance over software acquisition, installation, and usage, as well as inventory and monitoring practices that detect unauthorized or unlicensed software. It also includes access control that limits who can install software and change configurations, because uncontrolled installation increases both licensing risk and security risk. For beginners, it helps to see that unauthorized software is not only a malware risk, it is also a compliance risk that can lead to audits, penalties, or forced changes during critical operations. When security controls support software license compliance, they also strengthen the organization's overall control of its computing environment. Patents are often misunderstood in security contexts because people assume patents are only about legal filings, not operational control. In reality, patent-related risk can include premature disclosure of invention details, loss of novelty, and competitive harm. Security controls can support patent strategy by protecting research data, design documents, and internal communications about inventions. This is especially important in organizations where research and development is a competitive advantage, because leaks can influence both market competition and legal positioning. Translating this into controls involves classifying sensitive research information, controlling access based on roles, and monitoring for unusual sharing or external transfers. It also includes protecting collaboration environments, because innovation often happens through partnerships and distributed teams. For beginners, it is enough to understand that patent protection depends on careful handling of invention information, and security provides the mechanisms to maintain that careful handling at scale. Trademarks and brand protections connect to security in a different way because they are about identity and trust in the marketplace. Digital impersonation, phishing, and fraudulent domains can harm customers and damage brand reputation, which can reduce the value of trademarks and create legal and operational consequences. Translating trademark concerns into security controls includes monitoring for impersonation attempts, controlling the organization's digital identities, and protecting marketing and customer communication channels. It also includes ensuring that official communications are consistent and verifiable, reducing the chance that attackers can convincingly mimic the organization. While this can sound like marketing, it is actually part of trust management, because the organization's name and symbols are security-relevant assets. For beginners, the key idea is that brand trust is a protective barrier, and attackers often try to erode that barrier by impersonating the organization. Security controls that protect identity and communications help preserve that trust and reduce harm. Another important element of translating intellectual property laws into controls is understanding the life cycle of intellectual property within the organization. Intellectual property is created, stored, shared, modified, and sometimes retired or licensed, and each stage introduces risk. For example, early drafts of a design may be shared widely for collaboration, but that sharing can increase exposure. A product launch may involve external partners, which increases the number of access paths. Employee offboarding can create risk if an employee leaves with proprietary information or retains access to internal systems. Translating obligations into controls means designing protections that follow the life cycle, not just protecting a final document. This can include role-based access control, logging and monitoring of sensitive repositories, and structured processes for sharing with external parties. For beginners, it helps to see this as managing the flow of valuable information through the organization, ensuring it is accessible enough to create value but controlled enough to prevent leakage and misuse. Contracts are a major source of intellectual property obligations, and they often define what information is owned by whom and how it can be used. Employment contracts may define that work produced belongs to the employer, while contractor agreements may define different ownership terms. Partner agreements may define shared ownership, licensing, or restrictions on reuse. These contractual obligations must be translated into access and handling controls, because a contract is only enforceable in practice if the organization can prevent unauthorized use and can demonstrate compliance. For example, if a contract restricts access to certain partner data, the organization must implement access controls that enforce that restriction and logs that prove it. If a contract requires segregation of certain projects, the organization must design repositories and permissions to keep work separated. For beginners, the key idea is that contracts create rules about data and creations, and security controls are the organization's way of making those rules real and provable. Without controls, compliance becomes a promise without evidence. Monitoring and evidence are especially important for intellectual property because disputes often depend on proving what happened, who accessed what, and when something was created or changed. A security program can support intellectual property claims by preserving audit trails, change histories, and access logs for key repositories. This is valuable not only for detecting theft, but also for supporting legal arguments about authorship, ownership, and misuse. Evidence also matters for defending against accusations, because organizations may need to prove they used licensed material appropriately or that they did not access a competitor's protected information. Translating intellectual property concerns into controls, therefore, includes thinking about logging, retention, and integrity of records. For beginners, it helps to understand that the goal is not to spy on employees. The goal is to maintain reliable records of activity around high-value assets. Reliable evidence reduces uncertainty, speeds investigations, and supports fair resolution of disputes. Finally, intellectual property controls must be designed with usability in mind, because overly restrictive controls can block innovation and collaboration. If engineers cannot share ideas internally, if writers cannot access their tools, or if researchers cannot collaborate, the organization loses productivity and may create informal workarounds that are less secure. A mature approach balances protection with practical workflows, using least privilege access, clear classification, and safe sharing mechanisms rather than blanket restrictions. It also includes education so staff understand why certain information is handled differently, which reduces accidental misuse. For beginners, the key point is that security is not only about locking things down, it is about enabling safe value creation. Intellectual property is valuable because it supports innovation and brand identity, and security controls should protect that value while allowing it to grow. Identifying intellectual property laws and translating them into security controls means understanding what kinds of protected assets the organization creates and uses, where obligations come from, and how legal rights depend on operational behavior. Patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets each introduce different risks, from premature disclosure to unauthorized copying to impersonation, and each risk can be reduced through targeted controls. Trade secret protection depends on maintaining secrecy through access control and monitoring, while licensing and copyright compliance depend on inventory, installation control, and evidence of authorized use. Contracts shape ownership and permitted use, so security controls must enforce and prove those rules across the life cycle of creation, storage, sharing, and offboarding. Monitoring and record integrity provide the evidence needed to investigate misuse and defend rights responsibly. When intellectual property is treated as a security-relevant asset class, the organization protects innovation, preserves brand trust, reduces legal risk, and builds a program that supports both creative work and defensible governance.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.